As many of you may have noticed, I use a wheelchair for mobility. It's subtle, so you might have to look close, but I promise you it's there. I use this wheelchair because I have a disease that makes my muscles weaker and weaker over time. Up until about the age of 10, I was able to walk, although honestly, by the time I was 9, it was more accurate to call it a waddle. I always knew that I had some physical limitations, but until I was using more of this adaptive equipment, only the people that really knew me knew that I had a physical disability. When I could walk, people treated me the same as they treated my peers. And when I started using more adaptive equipment, I noticed that my treatment became more and more like a child. Now, often, when I'm on the street or in public, strangers will come up to me and say things like, "Oh, slow down," when I'm moving very slowly, or other wheelchair jokes like that. They'll talk down to me like I'm a child, or they'll tell me how brave or inspiring I am. This can bother me a lot because I don't think I'm brave or inspiring. I'm just living my life, you know? It's just my life. I'm living with my disease. I'm not overcoming it or defeating it. As I grew older and began using more adaptive equipment, I began noticing how few people there were in the media or other forms of entertainment with disabilities. This is especially hurtful to me and was in my teen years because we consume so much media, yet I couldn't find anyone who really looked like me. I grew frustrated with this lack of representation, especially when someone was stereotypically portrayed. When movies like Wonder Woman and Black Panther came out, I was really excited. These movies were the first of their kind in Marvel or DC history. And then I realized something. The push for diversity was coming to Hollywood, as it was for all other types of media. What if I could make something in the genre of superheroes that could be used as a way to spread awareness? Of course, I didn't think I'd ever actually be able to do this. When I had this idea, it was the end of my junior year, and I figured I was too busy for the next 3 months, especially considering I was doing a program at St. Paul's School over the summer. But then one of my friends suggested that I do it for my senior project, and I thought that was a great idea. I thought that I would write a comic book about a character with a disability somewhat similar to mine, who was a superhero. And though I couldn't actually draw any of the panels, that's exactly what I did. My name is Elizabeth Hunter, and for my senior project, I wrote a comic book. In a report by the Media Diversity and Social Change Initiative, it was reported that of the top 100 movies in 2015, only 2.4% of all characters with speaking roles or names had physical, cognitive, or communicative diseases. There we go. 81% of the main characters, of those main characters, were males, and no characters with disabilities were a part of the LGBTQ community. Furthermore, 71% of all characters with disabilities were white, and not even 5% of all of them were played by characters with disabilities, by actors with disabilities. In contrast to these statistics, the US Census reports that about 12% of the American population has a disability, and the gap between genders and disability is not that wide. This is extremely problematic because this effectively erases an entire community of disabled people that aren't white, straight males. Additionally, many stories about people with disabilities center about how they're inspiring or how they just want to be fixed or normal again. Even the show Glee, which was praised by many for its diversity, has a character named Artie, who is in a wheelchair after being paralyzed in a car accident. The actor who plays Artie is an able-bodied man. And the show has a couple of storylines that center around how Artie just wants to be able to walk and dance again. And it even goes as far as to have a dream sequence in which he does this. Now, while the show does make some strides in at least having a character with a disability on the show, it can be hard to see these storylines because he does seem truly happiest when he's walking in those scenes. And this is just a hard stereotype for those of us in wheelchairs to have to consume. You know, I know that for me, my disability doesn't control my life. It's just a part of it. And I have, at points in my life, felt sad or helpless, but I'm sure everyone else in this room has too. And although it is hard to sometimes not dwell on the negative, I try to make the best of every opportunity that I get, which, again, I'm sure you can all relate to. By focusing on these negative stereotypes, the media is perpetuating the stereotype that people with disabilities can't be truly happy unless they're whole again. When I first started researching the representation of people with disabilities in the media, the lack of representation made me kind of mad. Although my disability doesn't control my life, like I said, it can make certain aspects more difficult, like finding areas that are truly accessible. When I saw media portrayals of disability, I found that very few characters actually went through everyday things like that. Instead, they often had to face huge life-changing decisions, or they were only there to provide insight for other characters. I decided that in my story, I would only talk about things that I had actually experienced. Well, and keep it as real as possible. As real as possible, of course, excluding the superpowers. That would be cool. As I started to create the book and do my research, I learned about another troubling stereotype called supercripping. This is when a character has a disease or disability, but they also have superpowers that effectively cancel out their disability. An example of this is Daredevil, pictured on the projector. Matt Murdock, the star, the main character, I guess, is blind. He was blinded as a young boy in a chemical spill. But as a result of the chemical spill, he gained these powers to be able to sense things around him, effectively canceling out his blindness. And because of this, it makes it so that in some ways, he isn't truly disabled, because he is able to see, maybe not with his eyes, but he's able to sense all those things around him. And while I do love that they have another character with a disability in the media, I do wish that it wasn't with his disease effectively canceled out. I didn't want to do that in my comic, so I created superpowers that are genetically linked, but not to the mutation that causes my character's disease. Instead of telekinesis, which I first thought was going to be the main power of my superhero, I decided on photokinesis, or the manipulation of light, with the secondary power of healing. When I explained this to my mentor, Mr. Dixon, he asked me, well, if she has healing powers, can't she just heal herself? Here's the thing, she can. She can heal all of her wounds and injuries. But her disease itself isn't a wound or an injury. It's the way her genes are wired. Therefore, she can't just be fixed, because that isn't the point. I wanted to make sure that she was just like a real person, of course, excluding the superpowers. In the real world, I will be able to thrive with my disease. And I want to make sure that this story is present in my story and the narrative in the media. And one thing that I realized that I had to do before even writing the story was talk to people to find out what they knew about disability. I know a lot about my own disability and the equipment that I use because it's what I live with. But since I wanted to make this comic for a wider audience and not just myself, I decided that I would have to learn from people what they wanted to know about me. To do this, I went to Ms. Dustin's advisory, Ms. Aubyn's Flex, and a third grade class, which is where that photo was taken. I let them ask me any questions that they had about my disability, and they all asked some really good ones. They asked questions that they might have felt uncomfortable asking me in other situations, but I told them that I was open to answering anything because this was a time when I told them that it was okay. While I was there, I tried to convey that through the message of kindness and compassion, we can all be superheroes. Now, I'm not sure how much the third graders will remember of my visit, but at least, hopefully, they'll remember that I was there, that I was talking to them just like anyone else. And if nothing else, hopefully they'll be as kind to me, or hopefully they'll be as kind to anyone else as they were to me. Now, since I can't draw, my comic looks a little different. I have written it as a script with dialogue and detailed descriptions of what's happening in each panel. This is the cover art that I created for it, and it's called Iridescence. Someday, hopefully soon, I would love to collaborate with an artist to draw the panels and then publish, hopefully. In conclusion, the harmful stereotypes surrounding people with disabilities that are prevalent in the media can be damaging to those of us who live with them. Stories of inspiration are hard for me to consume because it always shows someone with a disability who was fixed or saved by an able-bodied person. These images are harmful to the public perspective of people with disabilities. And though my disease may have changed some of the experiences I've had, which may in turn have helped shape my personality, there are more factors that had more of an effect on my life. I am not who I am because of my disability, or in spite of it. When you meet a new person, try to judge them by their actions, not just your first impressions of them. By refusing to buy into and promote harmful stereotypes surrounding groups of people, we can avoid contributing to the misunderstandings. I am also guilty of making quick judgments about people. But by learning to see people for who they are, and not just judging them by what group they fit into based on circumstances they can't control, we can all be superheroes. Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Dixon?
You were talking about how you were frustrated by the representations of people in the media, right? Do you have any examples of figures with handicaps or disabilities or whatever who you think are really good representations?
Yes, so, oh gosh, his name is, I'm blanking on his name right now, but Dustin from Stranger Things. He has a rare growth defect, I believe, but he is in a show where the focus isn't his defect. Instead, the focus is him as a friend. And it actually isn't even drawn, no attention is drawn to the fact that he has a disability. He's just there with his friends. Or Atticus Schaefer, who was on The Middle, also had a disability, but no attention was drawn to that. He was just seen as anyone else. Speechless, the show starring Micah Fowler, I also like that a lot because although the show does talk a lot about disability, it's more about the family aspect of it and how he is able to have good relationships with people despite some of the challenges that he may have. And instead of his story only providing insight or inspiration for other characters, it talks about how he himself is able to thrive and survive with his disease and disability. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.